Welcome back. It's a new year, full of new opportunities to learn and grow. Of course, the new year brings new resolutions, losing weight, starting a new career. Or maybe some of you are thinking about refocusing on education for yourself or your kids and considering homeschooling as an option. If that's you, then you're in luck. Today we welcome Kristy Houle, a former teacher, principal, outreach coordinator, and host of the Classroom Matters podcast. Kristy successfully transitioned from teaching in a classroom to providing rich learning opportunities for her kids at home. And she's here to share her story and debunk some homeschooling myths so we can all make the right decisions for our families. Let's dive in and get started.
They are the fabulous learning nerds. Cause if you're tired of the old ways of getting it done, you've got the fabulous learning nerds. Scott, Dan, and Abby are making it fun. The best ideas that you've ever heard. So everybody spread the word. They're gonna keep you turning. The fabulous learning nerds. Fabulous learning nerds. Oh yeah!
Hey everyone, welcome back to another fantastic episode of your Fabulous Learning Nerds. I'm your host, Scott Schutte. And with us, he's jolly, he's happy, Dan Coonrod.
Dan the man. Oh, yeah.
Dan.
What's up, Scott? You know, I am jolly.
You are. You are. What are you doing on the 24th, starting at about, 3 o'clock? You know, do you kind of like disappear for a while and then maybe we'll see you the next day? Is that kind of the deal?
I'm
or
really not at liberty to discuss what happens around the holiday time. Like I said, I don't do holidays. So, you know, but yeah.
I gotcha. Okay. That's a secret. If you would like to know what Dan Coonrod is actually doing Christmas Eve, you could email us at learningnerdscast@gmail.com. Other than that, how you doing, sir?
You know, I'm fair to middling. I'm fair to middling, sir. I feel like that's always the setup and serve. Like you're just waiting there with the fair to middling button to pounce.
That's my job, really, honestly, and that's what good leaders do. We set and we let everybody else kind of spike at home. I mean, that's kind of how we do it. So, which is great. Did you get your kids a Krampus on the counter yet?
I haven't yet, but I want to. I really do. You know, I absolutely positively love the idea. So, like, okay, Elf on the Shelf is like a tattletale. What does Krampus on the counter do? Like, if you're bad and you're not listening, like, I don't imagine Krampus is coming to the parents being like, hey, the kid didn't do what it was supposed to. Is Krampus like, what is Krampus doing?
Well, Krampus will kidnap bad little boys and torture them with evil gingerbread creatures.
But like even on the counter, like mini Krampus, that's tough.
Yeah, no, he's watching to make sure those kids are keeping are behaving, and if they're not, it's a bad thing.
Okay, all right.
We can get into that more after we chat with our good friend Abby, who's with us. Ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, she's wicked happy. It's Abby Dawson. Abby.
What's up, Scott?
Do you lock away your horrible children when they're bad?
No, but I mean, it's funny you bring up Elf. We tried it last year, and once we explained the premise to him, we said, hey, he's here to watch and report back to Santa on what you're doing. He was like, yeah, get him out of the house. He wanted none of it.
Smart kid.
No, you can buy clothes for your Elf on the Shelf. You know that, right?
Why?
They do. They make you have the standard traditional flair, right? The red costume, but you can get sweaters. My employee Maggie got a sweater, and it said Tito's on it, and she proclaimed herself to be the parent of the year.
Yeah, I saw that. I love me some Maggie.
Love Maggie. Maggie's great.
It's the most I've ever liked Elf on the Shelf.
I know, right? So that's awesome. Hey, speaking of fantastic people who are great with their children and don't need a elf on the shelf or a Krampus on the counter. We have an amazing guest with us today. Her name is Kristy Houle, and she's going to tell us all about those kinds of things in a little segment we call What's Your Deal?
Hey, man. What's your deal?
Kristy,
Hello.
what's your deal?
Well, first I want to say that we don't really do the holidays either. My husband feels very similar to Dan there, and we would just rather not even acknowledge them at all. But we do because, we're pressured and society makes us, but we have gotten away from it quite a bit. We take trips and we just spend time with our kids. And if they want a present, hey, we'll get you a present.
I
love that,
that's
Kristy.
awesome. I say be brave. So recently I got some laptops to give to my nieces and nephews. And my parents and my brothers and sisters are like, oh, we'll wait till Christmas. That's such a good Christmas gift. I'm like, no, I want to give them a present now. I don't want to wait till Christmas.
Yeah.
They can have it now.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, my kids are amazing human beings pretty much all year round. So why would I want to torture them and make them feel otherwise by making them wait until one day a year? And then it's over. Then you've got this Christmas depression. Nobody wants that. So it's like, just be happy all year.
Boom.
I'm with you, Dan.
I'm thinking this year too, like it's going to be not a lot of stuff. And my granddaughter had a birthday party and it was excessive. I mean, made me ill, kind of excessive as far as how many presents were given to her. Like, what do you do now? Like, the kid got like 80 things. I'm not kidding. And so, it's why can't it just be another? Thanksgiving's becoming one of my favorite holidays because people. What is it about? Just get together with people you love and have a good time, right? And enjoy one another. I think that's kind of the path that we're on. So that to hear that you're going down that path or you're already there, that's inspiring. That's fantastic. I think that's a good thing. So talk to us a little bit about your own journey, though. I'm interested in that.
So my personal deal, aside from how we celebrate the holidays, is, I am an educator at heart. I started my educational journey right out of college, became an elementary school teacher, loved every single second of it. My first year of teaching was pretty horrendous because they hired me as an overflow teacher, which means they had way too many kids in second grade and not enough teachers. So I came in September after the school year had started, and way back 20 plus years ago, they didn't have a system or a protocol for choosing children appropriately to balance out the new classroom. And every teacher, there were 7 teachers that were able to pick 3 to 4 children that they would like to see leave their classroom and go into a new classroom. So you can only imagine the type of class that I had the first year of teaching. It was almost my last year of teaching, but I stuck it in. I absolutely love that class. And I taught for 10 more years in the elementary school setting in 2nd and 3rd grade. And then I moved into a assistant administrative position in a building of about 1,000 children. Loved it. And then very quickly moved up to the head principal position of another large district in Missouri and spent about 10 years in that position and was moving my way into the superintendency and decided to leave that environment for lots of reasons. And now I have been homeschooling my children, and one of my children are still homeschooled, 2 are in the public school system, and I still dabble my toe every day in the world of education, whether that is homeschool learning environments, private school learning environments, charter school learning environments, public school, it makes no difference. Education is truly something that happens across all settings. And so that's kind of what I do. I identify as an educator at heart. And so that's kind of what my deal is.
Well, that's fantastic. I'm super excited to hear more. Let's go ahead and dive into debunking some of these homeschool myths, so to speak, with our topic of the week.
Are you ready?
Okay, Kristy, hit us with some myth busting, so to speak, about this idea of homeschooling.
Well, myth number 1, that all homeschool children are antisocial, do not have a lot of social skills, are awkward in groups of children. Absolutely not the case. I have 3 children My oldest son is a senior this year. My middle son is an 8th grader, and my youngest son is almost 12. And all 3 of my children were homeschooled for approximately 4 to 5 years. And my 13-year-old social calendar is bigger than mine. My children are all very, very much acclimated to any environment that they go into. They can hang out with any crowd of kids and get along great. And so, I think one of the biggest myths is that, kids that are in a homeschool environment don't get the social interaction, and they can't hang out with normal kids and they're awkward. And that's just truly not the case.
I 100% agree. We've homeschooled my daughter for most of her academic life. And, drop her in any social situation and she'll take right off. She's got this great, independent streak and just this great, no nonsense attitude 9 times out of 10. I'm just like, man, where did she get that from? Because it's not from me. And just, it's awesome. So yeah, no, I 100% agree with that.
Yeah. And when I was growing up, I grew up in a big family, and I knew how to be around my siblings. I knew how to be around our family and our friends at home. But at school, I was pretty dorky and hung out with a very small crowd. I don't know if school really gave me the social skills that people just assume that you get there. So I think that that's its own myth in some ways, that school just automatically somehow transfers these skills to kids.
Yeah. Well, and I think that people assume that being around a large group of children automatically makes you a more appropriately social person. And if you think about it, the school day consists of students sitting and not really being allowed to have dialogue or collaboration or conversation. Everyone is, walking down the hallway in a row. No one is speaking. Kids have bubbles in their mouths. Kids are being asked to be quiet. At my son's school, they're sitting in assigned seats right now, and they're not even being allowed to talk to each other at lunch. And really, the only socialization that they're getting is when the teacher allows it or during passing time. And a lot of that stuff is not always the most appropriate type of interaction and socialization that I would want my children to be involved with. So we have to think about it from that standpoint as well.
Yes. Awesome. So how difficult was that change for you? So, spent a lot of time even, working in the public sector, and now you're going to go to homeschooling. How hard is it? Because my guess is that there's a bunch of folks in our audience that are like, yeah, that would be really great. I just don't know how, and I'm kind of scared. So debunk that for us if you could.
Absolutely. So, my story is a little unique in the fact that I was not the educator that didn't want to be in the school setting anymore and didn't want to be involved with that and felt that there were obstacles that my kids couldn't face and that I didn't enjoy it. It was really the opposite. I was very passionate. I was in love with my community when I was a school administrator. I worked I was an administrator in Ferguson, Missouri during the time of the tragedy of civil unrest and the death of Michael Brown. And so that really took a toll on us as a school community. But I loved the kids. It was my dream job. I really wanted to be a superintendent. That was where I was headed after I received my doctorate degree. And we unfortunately had a lot of family loss the year that I decided to leave. We lost my mother very, very unexpectedly and young in February of the year that I left. And then my father passed also very young and unexpectedly that November. At the same time, my youngest son was diagnosed as having some developmental disabilities, but he tested out of services in kindergarten. So he was really struggling. And so with all of these things happening in my life, I knew that I really was needed with my family. My family needed me. There was a lot going on when you lose parents like that with things back home. And I was one of the older siblings. So I was sort of thrust into that role of mom and dad with some of the younger siblings. And it was a difficult decision. It was probably one of the hardest decisions I've ever had to make, to leave the public school environment. It was not something I wanted. And you can imagine the shock on everyone's faces, because I was known in the district as this, full of energy and full of fire and wanting to change the world and loved public education, to, okay, now I'm resigning within 6 months and I'm going to start homeschooling my youngest son with that. So my kids had a great public education when they were there. They went for the first couple of years of school. And, like I said, my youngest son was diagnosed at an early age with a developmental disability. He didn't really receive services, wasn't going to receive services the next year. And every time I would sit down with the administrators at his school or his teachers, they would say, he's such a great kid. He's quiet, but he just doesn't qualify. He really needs one-on-one, but we cannot give that to him because of the system. The system won't allow him to have one-on-one. And he really needs that because he's getting lost. And we're talking about a 5-year-old child. And so with me having the background in education that I did, I knew that it was my responsibility as not only his mother, but as an educator to take on that role and to make sure that he could thrive and flourish in an educational setting. And so that was the decision. All those decisions were sort of made in about the same 6 months. So you can imagine how quickly my life changed. And, along with that comes a loss of finances, a loss of, your identity and who you are. You're this person that gets up and goes to school and loves these children. And I was leaving a school full of children that I truly loved dearly and their families to be where I needed to be, which was with my own children. And so with that, my other son, who was at the time going into 2nd grade, said, "Hey, Mom, I wouldn't mind being homeschooled with you. This looks like, great fun." And so he decided to be homeschooled. And so at that point, I was homeschooling both of my youngest children. And then my oldest son, about 2 years later, decided he wanted to do online curriculum at home and possibly graduate early. And so that's how all 3 of them came to be at home with me. So I think sometimes we think that folks who transition from public education to homeschooling are because they find an issue or a problem with the public education system. And that certainly was not the case with me. And I know that's not always the case with everybody that decides to do that. A lot of families decide to homeschool for reasons completely outside of what's happening in the public education world. So it doesn't have to be an us against them.
Yeah, I totally get it. That makes sense. What's another myth that you might find popular around homeschooling that you may want to chat a little bit more about?
Oh, another myth. So I also think that students that are homeschooled are missing out on all of these grand opportunities that public school children have. The dances, homecoming, prom, that they're not getting the full experience of this wonderful, school setting. And, that's just not the truth, because my children at home have had so many other opportunities for experiences because we weren't constrained by a public school schedule. If we wanted to travel, we could travel. If we wanted to go somewhere and learn for the day, we could do that. So they have those kinds of memories and those kinds of experiences. And it wasn't so much about missing out on a dance or missing out on an event at a school.
That's great. All right, so we've made the decision, right? We're going to go ahead and we're going to do this. We're going to go ahead and step into a homeschool environment. What do I need to be successful? How do we create that environment at home where you're going to have the best chances for success? What has your experience been like in that arena?
Well, I can tell you that when and another myth, this kind of goes along with what I'm getting ready to say, is you do not have to have an educational background to be an excellent homeschool parent. And I think that's a myth that a lot of people think, oh, well, you don't have any background in education. Well, you certainly can't teach your own child. And that's just ridiculous. Some of the best homeschool parents I've seen have absolutely no experience at the college level in education. So I want to get that out there. And, I can tell you that honestly, possibly my experience in education was really sort of, it didn't benefit me at first because that's all that I knew. And so to be in a homeschool setting with these children, the very first thing that I did was to replicate the public school setting. And it did not work for us. But it took me 6 months to a year to realize this isn't what this should be. It was so funny because my husband, I'll never forget, one day I had, we turned our dining room into a homeschool room, and I had their 3 little desks set up in a row, and I had the teacher's desk over here, and I had the reading corner over here, and I had the bookshelf over here, and I had my files. And I kid you not, went so far as to have the little pole American flag sticking out of the top of my doorway in the dining room. Not joking. I had name tags. But that was all that I knew. That was who I was. I had done that for 20 plus years. I had bulletin boards in my home. I had behavior charts hanging in the room. And so it wasn't working. And there were a lot of tears. There were a lot of frustrations. There was push and pull between me and my children. And one day my husband, who also works from home, came up and said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Well, I'm teaching." "What do you mean?" "I'm teaching." And he said, "But this is like a public school. That's all you've done. This isn't truly homeschool. You've just taken what you did in the public school, which doesn't work in a homeschool setting, because in a public school, you have to have a system. You have to have organization. You're dealing with hundreds of children, where in your home, you're only dealing with 2 or 3, and it can look much differently." And so once I realized that, I was able to let go of some of those things. That was hard for me, to let go of the behavior chart, to let go of the Pledge of Allegiance every morning, to let go of the seating in rows, and really let my children learn organically, learn through experiences. I had to figure out what type of a learner my child even was. And that was a difficult pill for me to swallow, that I don't even really know, because I had never been their teacher. And so I think if you walk into the most perfect homeschool setting, it's children learning, engaging, talking, discussing, inquiring, questioning, engaging in things that they love and that they're passionate about, and that they want to become better just all around people because of it, regardless of what the material is.
Kristy, I love that story. And I'm sure there's so many people who in the past year or two felt that way. I saw so many Instagram posts and friends on Facebook who'd set up the desk, and they had the everything on the walls that they thought made it feel like a school. And I'm sure no matter how hard they tried, they were like, "Why isn't this working? I don't get, why isn't this working?" And I think that's an excellent point to say you shouldn't be replicating something that is intrinsically different. My neighbor across the street has 5 kids who she homeschools. And when you walk into their house, it doesn't look like a school. There's a swing in the middle of the house where they go play. There's musical instruments. There's a whole room for that. There's a room where they spend a lot of their time that's just like a communal, everyone gathers around a table, but it's not a school environment, but they're thriving. And I think she's doing a lot of the things you're talking about, where she's finding what works for them.
That's great. So I guess that begs a question, like, how do we, and probably a 2-part question, right? So the first part, the learner in me is going to be like, well, how do we assess, right? What are the tools for assessment as to if they're learning and grasping and growing in the way that we want them to? And then, how can, or what tools are available to help us get there, right? So talk a little bit about, this idea of assessing how well we're doing, and then some tools that maybe you've discovered that can help you be more successful at imparting and helping them grow in the way that you want them to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's a really good question, because I do get that a lot from folks that reach out to me, especially now that I have, 2 of my children are now back in the public school setting. And that's, another myth that you can't, do both. Well, I've been doing it for the last 2 years, and all my kids are very successful in their own way. I have two children in public school and one still at home. And so I think the assessment piece is really something that folks automatically, say, "Oh my gosh, well, how do you know if your child is doing what they're supposed to be doing at a certain age or a certain milestone, or developing or learning?" So one, there's thousands and thousands upon thousands of different assessment tools that you can find online. You simply could really just get on Google and type in reading assessment, math assessments, and you can get as deep as you want with these assessments. Most of them are free. You can download test after test after test after test. You can download little text passages that will show you how to read with your child. And they'll say, this is a 3rd grade passage. If your child can read through this with only having, missing 5 words, they're on grade level, and these things. So there are thousands of tools out there by simply just Googling assessment for whatever the topic is. You can always go to your state's website. In Missouri, it's DESE, it's Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, and they will give you every single standard for every grade level and tell you exactly what your child should be learning and should be mastering for each grade. So if you choose to go that route and you want to make sure that your child is keeping on par with everybody else in their grade level, the material is there. You just simply have to find it. But I think one of the more important things to that question, Scott, is how do you know where your child already is? And how important is it for your child to be at the exact same spot as every other third grader in the nation? And so figuring out where your child is on their learning journey and how they learn best, to me, is much more important than where is my child performing, especially at the beginning stages of homeschooling. And that was something that I struggled with because I thought that I knew my children better than anybody. But as a typical mother at that time of 3 children that were in public school, I had the same song and dance that every other, or the majority of, I guess I should say, parents have. I went to work, they went to school, they came home, I looked at their binder, saw if they had homework, made sure they finished their homework, signed any papers that I needed to sign, figured out what they were working on for the day, put it back in their book bag, put them to bed. They got up, took their book bag, went to school. Repeat, repeat, repeat. That was great. I knew how my kids were performing based on their letter grades and their percentages and what the teacher said, but I really truly didn't know the kind of learners that my children were. And I mean, that actually really was an emotional break for me, because as a mother and an educator, I thought I should have known that, and I didn't. And so when I decided to homeschool my children, it took a good 6 months for me to figure out how my children learned best. What kind of a learner? Were they tactile learners? Were they auditory learners? Were they visual learners? And what really motivated them to learn? So I think that's a bigger hump for folks that are considering homeschooling or that have done homeschooling. We have to do that. You have to know how your kids learn, or you're not going to be able to teach them. You can shove every workbook in the world or every online program in the world down your child's throat, but if that's not how they learn and that's not how they take in information best, it's not going to work for them. So I do think it's important, though. I want to say I do think it's important that you have a good understanding of milestones and developmental marks that your children should be hitting and reaching. And if they're not reaching those marks as you see most fit for your child, then you do need to have interventions. You do need to have support, and you do need to figure out a way to teach them and to have them learn so that they can be where they should be with reading and math. You know, those are obviously, and writing, those are 3 of the most important things. Social studies and science really can be learned authentically and organically. So I try not to get too excited about those things when I talk about assessment with my children, but I do think you need to have a good understanding of where your child should sit on the developmental scale per se with their peers.
Kristy, what I'm hearing too is everything you've just said, I'm thinking, I should know that about my son anyway. I mean, last year was crazy, right? Suddenly people were homeschooling when they weren't necessarily ready for it. And going forward, I see a future where there's a lot more blended. Sometimes you'll be learning from home. Sometimes you'll be learning from school. I think those are things people are going to want to be ready to do, ready to assess, knowledgeable about where their kids are, knowledgeable about not just is my kid on the right path for a 3rd grader at this school, but where's he nationally? I want to really understand what the school is and isn't doing and excelling at. What kind of skills do you see for like the average parent? Maybe I'm not always going to homeschool, but am I ready when they do come home to do these things?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's, every kid is different. My youngest son is autistic. And so that was a whole different world that I had to get into, because I definitely was not an expert in special education or the teachings of special education students. So I think that really it's more of a marathon and not a sprint. You're not going to figure out how your kid learns best on day 1 or day 2 or probably even the first month. It's going to take a while for you to allow your child to have different experiences and to learn in different ways before you really get a good understanding of what their learning style or styles, because a lot of children have multiple learning styles that rise to the top, really are. But, I think skills as a parent is just the ability and the motivation to research, to read books, to learn, to watch your child, to observe, to not be in a hurry to get them to be exactly like every other child. it's like when we talk about, I have a couple of friends that have younger children that are in the stages of potty training. And they're just, oh my gosh, my child is, 3 and they're not potty trained and they're really panicking. And in my mind, I'm thinking, I don't even really remember how old my kids were when they were potty trained, but I'm pretty sure it was, they weren't going to kindergarten in a diaper. But when we're in that moment, we're so worried about being in line with where everybody else is that we sometimes let that take over instead of really just enjoying the process of learning and enjoying the process of watching our children get excited about something that they love and passionate about it and figuring out a way to learn that in a different way, as opposed to, here's the curriculum the school is using. Here's the curriculum that they said to use on this website. We're going to do page 1 on day 1, then we're going to do page 2 on day 2, and we're just going to keep going. So yeah, I think it's just, all parents have the ability to educate their children if they really are invested in their education.
Yeah, so I want my child to learn more, right? So she or he comes home, had a great day at school. I think a lot of us should go, hey, how was your day at school? And whatever answer I may get or not get is kind of the end of it, right? That's kind of what we do. So I'm really interested in hearing your experience. Like, how do we implement learning into our daily lives, right? Into our children's daily lives. So they come home, or maybe it's the weekend. What are some of those things that you did with your kids that, our audience can start to do with theirs?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a great question. And so I think sometimes we separate school and life. And a lot of folks do that, like what you're talking about, Scott, right? You're like, oh, okay, you had a great day at school. How was school? Fine. I mean, if you have a teenager, it's, I don't know. It depends on how old your child is. And, I have 2 teenage boys, almost 3 teenage boys. And like I said, one is a senior in public school this year, and one is an 8th grader. 13 going on 37. And so, their response when they come home is, but I really don't let it go at that. I will continue to ask questions and I continue to listen. And instead of asking them so many questions, I will just listen and I'll just let them sort of, even if they're talking to me about something that happened in the lunchroom with a group of kids or a group of guys, that was an important part of their day. So I listen to that instead of brushing that off and saying, okay, well, yeah, it was lunch, but what did you do in math? What did you do in science? How is this going? And so, I just want to get that out there that it is hard when you have children in public school, because remember, I have 2 kids in public school and 1 at home. So my homeschooler's education, I am creating. So I am fully aware because I have created that for them and I am with them every minute of that education and I am providing those resources for them. So he's a little bit easier for me to immerse in a daily life of education. We learn all the time. We don't homeschool from 8 o'clock to 3 o'clock. So, and I'll be honest with you, and I know a lot of parents are probably going to disagree with this, and that's okay because this is our journey and everybody has their own. But if my homeschool son is tired at 8 o'clock and he's had a late night, or maybe he, like I said, he's autistic, sometimes he stims, and so he has a hard time going to sleep at night, I will let him sleep until he needs to wake up. Now, I can't do that with my public school kiddos because they are on a school schedule. They have to get up and be at class at a certain time and get done. And if my younger son has to work until 4 o'clock, okay. If we learn on the weekends, okay. He's still going to get the material. He's still going to learn and he's not tired. So I think that's one of the great things. But, I think even small things, as when you talk about how can we make sure and immerse our children in learning all the time while we're living. We just did a thing the other day where we were in the kitchen and we were cooking and we had some cabbage juice left over from the cabbage that we were steaming and boiling. And so I thought, chemical reactions. We could take this red cabbage juice and add baking soda, vinegar, and we're going to get a chemical reaction. And so we sort of went from doing the cabbage to a little science experiment on the countertop. At the end of that, instead of throwing away all the extra cabbage juice, we poured it in a couple. And if you know, cabbage juice is purple when you cook it, and you drain the cabbage, the juice that's left over is purple. And so if you add certain elements to that, it's going to change color. It's going to change the way that it appears. It's, you've got your acids, your bases. And so you can integrate that. And it was like 10 minutes. But he got the idea of a chemical reaction with the cabbage juice. And it wasn't like I didn't have a worksheet. I didn't have a big thing. I said, here, throw this apron on. Let's pour some of this. And, bam, you've got a science experiment in your kitchen based off of what you just cooked. And you can do that with a million things, right? And that wasn't part of our school. That wasn't a planned activity. It just happened. The other big thing that I think folks don't realize that they can do is books. We love books. We have thousands of children's books, novels, young adult books in our home. My kids love to read. I love to read. Their dad reads. And so I will strategically place books all over my house. I will put books on the back of their toilet, like sort of standing up. You know how they do in the bookstore when they put books on the shelf so you can see the covers? Kids are going to grab a book eventually if you put them in enough places. If they're on the coffee table, the fireplace mantle, the windowsill in the kitchen, and just nonchalantly putting them in their line of sight, they're going to grab a book. They're going to become interested. And that's not something you have to plan. It's just small little ways that you can push learning into their everyday life and make it a lifestyle and not a separation from what you're always doing.
I love that. With my kid, we moved to year round, and we moved the school year start to January. So that way it's like just with like, hey, like this is what the rest of the world is on. So let's move away from like this idea that school starts in the fall, because that's kind of like a weird leftover. And then, same thing, like looked at her and said, okay, cool. Here's the curriculum. What subjects do you want to learn this year? Like, what do we want to add to this curriculum? And just like putting her in charge of her education to build this idea that like learning, just like you said, is happening all the time. So I love that idea.
Yeah. Yeah. And who doesn't have a Google or an Alexa in their house?
Yeah.
Everybody. In the mornings we'll play Beethoven or Mozart. The kids don't know that I'm doing like a music lesson. It's our music unit. But if they listen to enough classical music in the mornings, they're going to recognize it. They're going to be familiar with it. They're going to know the names of some composers. Do I care that my children know when Mozart was born and died? No, absolutely not. Not important information. Hey, good to know if you're a music major and if you really are interested in that. What I want for my children is I want them to appreciate it. I want them to recognize it. I want them to understand the basic concept of what makes up classical music and how it's different from jazz or hip hop. That's what I want for my children. I want them to have experiences and not shove a bunch of insignificant dates and facts down their throat and make them memorize it for the sake of memorizing it, and they'll never use it again in their life. So are there things that they do have to memorize? Yes. Are there things that they do need to understand and know how to do in math and basic equations? Yes. But for the most part, I think a lot of that can be done away with because the kids don't remember it anyway.
I like this idea of creating like a lifestyle. I'm glad you said that. And having this kind of immersive at home, we're having music on while we're doing things that also kind of contributes to this growth and experience. I feel like that would translate to a place where like you're just a more, when you're ready to learn something, you're open to it. When I'm ready to pick up a book, it's there for me. Versus like, otherwise you're waiting in the classroom for the teacher to say, this is when we're learning this. Can you talk a little bit more about how have you seen that change your kids? And have you seen it as something maybe we could integrate a little more into just public school kids too, so we can bring that more to them?
Yeah, I think when we talk about what's happening in public school, it's, I am an advocate for teachers. I love teachers. Obviously there's always teachers that maybe should find something else to do besides being in front of a classroom full of children. And maybe that wasn't their calling and they should maybe move on. But I think that's true of any occupation. But I think that the majority of educators that are in schools are really confined by a systematical problem in the United States. It's not a teacher problem. It's not a principal problem. It's not a family problem. It's a systematic problem that we have, that we are still doing school like we did when school systems started in the industrial age. And it's been really difficult to move away from that. And so I do see that I have seen a lot of positive changes in the public school setting where we're going more from the teacher sort of being the sage on the stage to teachers really attempting, even though confined by a system and a lot of constraints, going more to a collaboration. a student-led, inquiry-based learning. So I know they're trying to do that, but that's hard to break out of when you're in such a strong system that spans, every state and, across the nation. And so I think that teachers that are attempting to even be open to those types of learning environments, cell phones is a big controversy right now, where you have a lot of schools and a lot of teachers that are really trying to embrace the technology of cell phones and students with cell phones. And then you still have a lot of schools that are very resistant to students having even touching their cell phone during the school day. And so to me, when you talk about a topic like that, why would you ever think that all of a sudden this child is going to perform for you and be really paying attention to you when their whole identity is the cell phone, a lot of kids, and they're now not allowed to use that for 8 hours? And it's been glued to their hand until they walk into a classroom. And now that's how they learn. Kids are learning through their cell phones, whether we want to admit it or not. That's how they're getting their information. Not always good information, but what do? I'm going to Google something as soon as I was thinking of something that we were just talking about. As soon as we get off here, I'm going to pick up my cell phone and I'm going to Google it, or I'm going to text somebody, or I'm going to find something out. But we're not allowing children to have that same ability, and it is stifling them. And so I think, things in public school that can be changed. I think there's a lot of control still in public schools from teachers to students. You do it because I said you do it. You turn your paper in on this day. You get, if you don't turn it in, it's a 0. Doesn't matter if you understand the work or not, because you didn't follow the rule. So I think the quicker we're able to get rid of some of those things, the better off our children are going to be, because they're just fighting the system at this point.
I totally agree. I've worked in plenty of places where cell phones aren't allowed, and there are lots of good reasons why, like personal identifiable information, stuff like that. But even with adults, when you're hey, you just can't have your cell phone here, it's a struggle and it's a fight. And so in a place where there's no reason other than because I don't want you to have a cell phone, that's silly. That's just looking for a fight to fight somebody.
Yeah.
Dan, I'm so glad you brought that up. I mean, we're dabbling in mobile learning design right now, and I feel like, especially in the space that I'm in, that's been a real challenge, because in the corporate environment, it's all HR is oh, no, we're salaried employees. We can't encourage them to do mobile learning, because what if they're off the clock? Now we're going to get, I'm they're going to do it anyway. They're
Yeah.
going to do it anyway. So what are you doing? What are you trying to protect them from? Growth, learning? At what point in time, I love what you're talking about. Our job in the learning sphere is to encourage discovery, not to be cops, right? And so what I love about what you're talking about is this whole idea of discovery is all around us, right? It's everywhere. And our ability to create moments where we get the discovery that's important, I think is really extremely valuable, and something that we all should be striving for, whether or not we send our kids to public school or not. Which does beg a question. So you've got 2 kids in public school, and I'm gonna assume that they were with mom for a while, right? And you got one at home. Talk about that. Talk to us a little bit about that. How challenging is that to do both? And then, more importantly, for me, I want to know, okay, I'll be completely transparent. I would be what, you want to go back to public school? Was I not good enough? That imposter syndrome,
Yes.
would
Yeah,
just totally take over.
Uh-huh.
Oh, I suck at this, and I should be really good at that. That's can't be the case. So talk to us a little bit about that journey and the challenge and how you're dealing with that.
Yeah, I love the fact that you asked that question, because it was an interesting couple of conversations that we have. And, I've always allowed my children the ability to, while still being respectful, to talk to us about how they feel. My kids are older and they're very intelligent. And like I said, they're wonderful kids. And so my 13-year-old, he's now 13. He finished out 6th grade here at home with us. And I knew that my 13-year-old child was extremely social. He is extremely athletic. At the time, because we weren't in school, he was wrapped up in the world of martial arts and jiu-jitsu, Brazilian jiu-jitsu, which he was doing outside of the school setting, obviously, because he was at home, but he was going to tournament after tournament. And I believed at one point he was ranked number 2 in the state of Illinois at 12 years old. And I knew that he had a lot of friends from the neighborhood. And I knew that he was itching to have a different experience. I knew that he was growing up and he really was craving those experiences outside of our home. And so when he brought that to my attention and said, hey, Mom, Dad, I feel like I really wouldn't mind going back to public school starting middle school. We had to have those conversations and say, this is how it's going to be different. These are going to be still our expectations. Why do you want to go to public school? Let's talk about that. And did we feel like, when you're 12 and 13 and you're a young man at that age, because kids are growing up way faster. I mean, I was still playing with Barbie dolls at 10 years old and 11 years old, and that's unheard of today. But when you're growing up in today's world, they're more mature. And my 13-year-old is very mature for his age. And we said, you know what? I said, son, I support you in however you feel you're going to learn and thrive best at this point in your life. So let's try it. The worst that could happen is you go into the public school setting, you don't feel comfortable, you're not successful, and you come home and you homeschool. I mean, homeschooling is like you write a letter or you call up there and say, hey, I want to, withdraw my child from your registration and he'll be coming home next week. So he said, okay, great, let's give it a try. That was that conversation. He started middle school and he has flourished. He has been on the 8th grade football team. He's now on the basketball team. He does very well. He's very well liked amongst his peers. He fit in great. And, I think also with that, it was a similar situation with my older son, who's now a senior. He had been very happy with homeschool, but he wanted to, be with his friends and he wanted to do the whole senior year and all those things. And we had the same conversation with him. I had to be very proactive with the school. I think that's another issue is you have to have a very close relationship and you have to communicate with these teachers because these are my children that I have taught for the last 4 or 5 years at home. And now I'm sort of just lending them to you and trusting you. So I am extremely involved in my child's education. I talk to their teachers at least once a week just to check in. I wish that parents would have a more proactive relationship with teachers and less of a reactive relationship with their teachers. A lot of parents don't even know who their kids' teachers are until something bad happens. And I chose not to do that. So I was on the email and phone with these teachers day one, appreciating them, thanking them, giving them background on my child. My lines of communication are always open for you. I support you. And we're in this together to educate these kids. And so it was difficult. I was very, very sad. I think I probably cried a few times because I was used to being with them every day, all day, and having that relationship with them. But I knew that I had to let them kind of go off on their own and do what they felt that they needed to do to flourish. And it's been, so far it's worked out really, really well. My son's going to graduate this year and he's straight A student. He's a wonderful kid. And my son will be my other son will be in high school next year. And again, he's very happy and he's doing well. And that's all that I can ask for my children.
It's so refreshing to hear that it's like something you can try, that there's permission to say, let's try it and we can always change. And that you don't have to make the change because of a failure, but maybe just because it's an opportunity to do something else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I agree. And it's if they fail, they fail. That's how you learn. And we try something else. We're here to support them in their journey in all areas of life, not just, oh, well, if you don't do this, this, or this, then you have to come back home. We don't want to use it as a punishment. We want to use it as a support. And if it doesn't work for you, we're here to help lift you up in another way, shape, or form. Learning can look different for every kid. And, look at how many athletes and how many celebrities never spent a day in public school. They had tutors. They were homeschooled because they had to spend their time on the ice or in the gymnasium or something like that. So it's really not about public school in my mind versus homeschool. It's about how can we all work together because we have the same goal, and that's to raise healthy, productive, educated, inquiry-based learners that are going to one day run the country. And so that's really, it's a big job. But I think instead of being separated, we have to come together and work as a whole unit, whether we're in public education, homeschool, or whatever that looks like for us.
Yeah, I love how you talked about this idea of, a safe space and being okay with failing as well. Because I think that's one of the things that's a real big challenge for us in the educational and learning field is creating moments for failure in a safe way. And I'm just super excited to hear about how naturally that can occur in the home and in some of the things that we can do to reinforce, like hey, well, it didn't turn out the way this science experiment, the kitchen caught on fire, right? But hey, we all learned something really great, and isn't that an awesome thing, right?
Okay. Yes.
Well, I'm just speaking
Now,
metaphorically.
what is the
because that's
difference
what would
between
happen in
black
my
smoke and brown smoke?
yeah. That would have been my kitchen. Hey, let's have this science experiment, Austin.
Yeah.
Let's do this. And
Yeah.
wife would have came home. What did you do?
We learned
something. We learned.
We learn. Yeah.
Tomorrow we're going to learn how to paint.
Yes. But I mean, just think about this. Think about the cell phone thing for a minute. If you gave a fourth grader his cell phone and had him use his texting app to write sentences to a friend, as opposed to giving him a blank sheet of paper and a pencil and saying, I want you to write 5 sentences, which one of those experiences do you think that he's going to learn the most from and be the most engaged on?
Yeah.
I mean, I can promise you it's going to be the cell phone. I let my younger son text all day long to his grandmother, to his brothers, because he loves to do that. And I'm like, hey, doesn't want to. And let's be honest. When's the last time you took a piece of paper and wrote anything to anybody?
Yeah.
I can't remember the last time I did it. It's
Abby,
either on the computer or on my phone.
Right. Yeah, and and this is a tool that's going to be with us forever, right?
Yeah.
So finding ways to utilize that tool in a productive way is really important. And one of the challenging things that I would just toss out, hey, listen, can you teach your audience, whether that be adults or children, how to use a tool in a productive way without it running their lives? Right? I can't tell you how many kinds of conversations I've had with people around attention management of, hey, turn off those notifications, or this is the way that that you can use this productively without it totally taking over our lives, which is so easy. It's so easy. And I'm a recovering phone addict. Still am sometimes, right? Catch me on a couch and the Netflix shows and all that great. Oh, gosh, golly gee, where am I today? So I love that idea, and I think it's really important for us to step more into that realm.
And to further that, Scott, to your point, like the students who are interacting with their phones all day, who are getting notifications all day, we're not going to train them in the workforce the same way we're training the people who are in there now. So it's important for us to understand how they learn, how learning's changing, so that we're really able to support them when they get to us.
Yeah, that's really cool. And that does beg a question, like as we begin to wrap things up, objectives. Like we've been talking in the last few weeks about the importance of objectives. So I'm going to go ahead and homeschool my children. Talk to us a little bit about what were some of the objectives you had for your kids? Like what was really important to you? And then what were some of the things that, and I know you were purposeful about it, what were some of the purposeful things that you did to ensure that they were successful and met those objectives?
Yeah, I think that a couple of my objectives when I decided to homeschool for my children was I wanted them to be self-starters and I wanted them to be self-learners. And what did I have to do, right? Looking at it from a backwards design, if at the age of 16, I want my child to be able to research and learn on his own without someone having to shove the information and tell him what page to be on, looking backwards, how do I get my child to be that way at that age, right? He's 5 now. At 16, I want him to be a self-starter, a self-learner. I want him to be able to critique things. I want him to be able to collaborate and to have an intelligent conversation with people on a certain topic. How do I go about doing that? And then you just take those steps, right? You start taking steps for independence. You start inspiring and fostering the love of learning in everyday life. You find out what their passions are and you allow them to do that. Now you've got your goal, your objective. I want my child to be, just using that example, a self-starter and a self-learner and self-motivated and engaged by learning. How do I make that happen? I wanted my children to be avid readers. And whether it was something that I chose for them to read or that they chose for themselves to read, I wanted my children to love reading because that's really the crux of learning. That's how you learn most things. It starts by being able to read what you want to learn about, along with the visual aspect of learning and listening. I think, one of my other objectives was along with, I want them to be self-motivated, self-starter learners. is I wanted them to have the ability to really truly listen and to communicate with people, because I feel like that's something that's missing with our children. Is they're already so worried about what they need to say next, or what they think you want them to say next. Sometimes we don't really listen to them, and they then form a bad habit of not being good listeners either. And listening, really, really listening, is a really difficult tool and skill to have. So I wanted my children to be good communicators, good listeners, and I just wanted them to be kind people. And you learn about a lot of how to be that way through experiences in learning and being around different types of people and being understanding and compassionate and having empathy for other people in different situations. And so, yeah, I think those were some of my overall goals for my children. I never had a goal of I want them to be able to do, calculus by the age of whatever. I never really had academic goals like that for them, but I knew I wanted them to be at a specific reading level and math level and things like that. But really, I just wanted them to be motivated, productive citizens, that can take care of themselves. And at 18, you got to go. I have three boys that are going to be three men. You have to be able to take care of yourself and be productive and give something back. So that was some of my objectives going into it. And I wrote all that down. Every year I write new goals for my kids. And then how do I accomplish those goals?
That is so great. And, I think it's so important too, because one of the challenges that I think that we have today is that we're not necessarily preparing our kids to be, effective citizens or even be effective at life, right? So we spend far too much time on, where do they land on the assessment, right? Versus, gee, do I know how to balance my checkbook? Do I know how to have good conversations with people? Do I know how to be kind to other people? I mean, and we just assume that that's happening. But if we assume that that's happening, I think we're really missing out on the opportunity that we, as either parents or people within that child's tribe, have to influence, educate, and inspire. And that's what I love about our time with you today, Kristy, is you've really done that, like really educate, influence, and inspire those people to be thinking about that. Because if we don't, we're going to get what we get, right? So, and with that, unfortunately, we're kind of coming up on time, but I do want to give you an opportunity to kind of like, hey, listen, in the time we've got left, what are some things that you would like to leave with our audience that you didn't have a chance to talk about?
I would love to leave the idea of embracing the process of learning in life and experiences with your children, whether you're a teacher. Really embrace that and live in the moment with them, and try not to be too caught up in grades, assessments, all of those things. Really look at these children through a different lens, that you are raising, these young men and women, and it's a big responsibility. And again, like I said, it's a marathon. It's not a sprint. You don't have to get there today or tomorrow, but just keep working at it. Your child is not, I tell my kids this all the time. And, I say to my sons, you're not the most important person in the room. It has to be about something else besides you sometimes. Teaching our children humility. And I know that's hard with social media now, to get them out of that me mindset, but really just embracing the journey with your children and your students.
Fantastic. Kristy, thanks so much. Love this time. It's great. I'm inspired. This is cool. Could you do us a favor? Could you tell our audience how they could connect with you and get more of this groovy stuff?
Absolutely. And thank you so much for having me on. It's a great podcast. Like I said, I've listened to several episodes. I love it. So I'm super pumped that I got to spend some time with you guys today. Folks can reach me. I actually have a podcast as well. It's called Classroom Matters. And you can find that on Apple, Spotify. You can also find me at a website. It's educate.today. And there are lots of fun K through 12 online resources for students and teachers and parents there. You can contact me there. You can also just contact me, Kristy, at educate.today. And please feel free, reach out, questions, assistance, help, whatever. I'm always here. So
thank you. Great. Well, we appreciate that that you're listening to us and Door's always open if you want to interview any one of us. That would be fantastic. I would love to be on your show. Do some cross-pollinating. Daniel-san,
Yes, Scott.
you do me a solid. Could you let our listeners know how they could connect with us?
Yeah, absolutely. All right, party people, if you haven't already, hit us up at learningnerdscast@gmail.com. Email us any questions you might have. Join in the discussion. We want to hear from you. If you're at Facebook, you can find us at Learning Nerds. And lastly, for all you Instagram party people, we're Fab Learning Nerds. Scott?
Hey, folks, that's going to wrap things up. Once again, want to thank our guest, Kristy Houle. Fantastic stuff on homeschooling and just how to be purposeful with your kids. Great stuff. Do me a favor. Could you go ahead and hit subscribe on that button wherever you're getting your podcasts so you can get more of us. Feel free to share that out with your friends. And if you're getting us on iTunes, Stitcher, or any other podcatcher, do us a favor. Leave us a review. We'd like to know how we're doing. We'd like to know how we can improve. With that, I'm Scott.
I'm Dan.
I'm Abby.
I'm Kristy.
And we're your fabulous learning nerds, and we are out.